Hi, Body Messiah. Today we're going to cover another lesson in UBP, and it's UBP Lesson Uncovering Biblical Prophecy, Lesson 17. We're going to have two parts to this lesson. This lesson is titled Babylon Continues to Fall. It's based off Revelation chapter 18, verse 2. These two parts are birthed out of an original lesson that we taught a year ago. That is COOH Lesson 8. As the Babylonian system falls, the beast gains ground. The beast system is gaining ground. It's gaining strength. So what we're doing is, because as we've stated previous, many people are searching for prophetic words or signs, and they're totally ignoring the prophecies that have been given in the book of Revelation. And they're ignoring drawing the parallels to certain countries and nations. Now, I understand that majority of Americans always feel that America is always positive on a pedestal, even when it comes to biblical prophecy. But Body Messiah, I urge you, for those of you who still have that mindset, to humble yourself and through faith and prayer, turn to the Most High God for Him to begin to give you the revelation. God has given these prophetic words thousands of years in advance as a warning mechanism for those of us who believe and trust in Him of the times that we're living in, the signs of the time. So we have to open our eyes to that. Be humble enough to. If you want to go and look, how Sajiko Bible Studies has broke down what represents the whore of Babylon today and what actually represents the beast system today, you can look at a lesson, and it's about 10 minutes long, called UBP Lesson 14, and it's titled The Whore of Babylon and the Beast. Now, if you want to dig deeper, and there are some longer lessons we have out there that you can go look at COOH, Come Out of Her, Lesson 6. Lesson 6 has 4 parts. And we go into detail of various aspects of the book of Revelation. We even cover who would represent the false prophet, who matches the attributes that are given to the false prophet in today's society. Okay? So you can go on your own and check that out. We're covering this so we'll understand what atmosphere we're in this present day and time. And as most of you know, America has always placed itself up on a pedestal high. And we're going to reveal through just 3 points. There are dozens, but just 3, due to time's sake, of how the image of America is beginning to crumble and continue to fall. And as that's happening, the beast system is incorporating some things. And in the background, there's a firestorm that's brewing, okay? We in the body of Messiah have to be strong enough to war against and battle against these old principalities of Baal and Asher worship, of idol worship. They are from times of old, and they represent particular systems that are in place today. And as we war against that, we make all of society better for all people, not just black and brown people. And as you've seen some of these trials that have gone on lately, you will understand how battling against that will help all of society, not only just black and brown people, but also descendants of Japheth. Okay? So we have to be strong in that body, Messiah. Now let's cover a few points here. America, and the image that it is always portrayed, is that it is the beacon of justice for all people, okay? That it is a free society, and that it has freedom for all. And then it's also viewed as having a strong military, right? The strongest military on the planet at one point in time. We also are viewed as the ones who would be the example of democratic elections, right? Now, in these points, you're going to see how these images have fallen apart. And we're going to show that, yeah, there's systemic oppression mainly against black and brown people. And we're going to cover some famous black and brown people here and their counterparts, how they were treated. So as we war against these, you will see that if we don't tackle this and make this be an honest system based on this so-called idea of freedom and justice for all, that when we don't do that, it affects all populations. It's also including the white population in a negative manner. All right? Notice the Rittenhouse verdict and how that has negatively affected the white population. And the next generation is observing that. So here, we see the hypocrisy in the justice system being covered. As we saw these police shootings or violence against black and brown people, and the person who perpetrated that violence walked scot-free, the whole world was beginning to see the difference, that there is a difference in justice, and that black people were being mistreated and have been, because that's the way the system was built in America and truly throughout most of the world, but especially in America. So as other people were beginning to see this before the face of the whole world, you have countries like, say, for instance, China, who last year told America, stop wagging your finger at us and preaching to us about treating our citizens fine, and stop lecturing us about a democratic society. You need to learn to treat black people better. They called the U.S. out on that. So you can see it's starting to crumble. Okay? Never seen that before. You'll see here where we're called a free and democratic society, but America has one of the highest prison population in the world. It beats China. All right? So think about that now. When you look at most of those who are incarcerated, at least 40% of the prison population have people who are mentally disabled, have learning disabilities, or psychological issues. Our prison system, when people are beginning to observe it in deep detail and taking a deep dive in it, it is built to cage people. None of it is built to rehabilitate. And when you think about those who are on that spectrum of having learning disabilities or mental disabilities, or even having psychological issues, we need to make a standard, even in the prison system, where the main objective is to try and rehabilitate people and not place them in a cage. So when they come out and they're struggling financially and can't get a job, that they do not turn back to that quick cash, which could cause them to harm other people or harm themselves. America can't lecture to any other nation. You see where Iran, Iraq, all these other nations have called America out on that. Talking about freedom and justice for all. You'll see where the highest number of women incarcerated is in America. The women population of prisoner is the highest in America, the highest in the world. So this image is falling apart. You'll see where our military was considered to be the strongest military on the planet. But yet, when you look and see that on January the 6th, the Capitol was nearly overtaken by a group of white supremacists. Now, white supremacists who marched in, who considered themselves the greatest of patriots, came in, attacked the police, the security. There are police officers who died due to that attack. There were people who marched in there who were threatening to kill the vice president. And they were urged on by our 45th president to do so. So the whole world is watching this going like, wow, this is America? Yes, they're beginning to see all of these things, this great image falling apart, okay? And then think about it. America has been known for going into other countries, so-called trying to help them establish free democratic elections. right, to be the example. But the majority of those so-called patriots believe that this past election, the system was totally corrupt and there were some illegal things going on with the election system. So much so that they're even battling against certain voting rights that will negatively affect black and brown people because they were upset with the way in which the election turned out. So all these other countries are looking like you can't talk and lecture to us. You need to handle your own problems. Okay? And they're observing this now in this image of a perfect America that's a beacon of hope and democracy and liberty and justice for all and freedom. And the strongest military is steadily crumbling. Okay? Now we'll go back and we can look at, like, for instance, I'm not here to argue whether or not these gentlemen, they're guilty or innocent. I'm just trying to point out the difference in the dynamic that people are beginning to dig deeper into when it comes to justice in America and how black and brown people are treated as opposed to their white so-called potential counterparts. So let's take Michael Jackson, for example. He had been accused multiple times of inappropriate behavior with a minor. Um, and one particular situation is where multiple times the Hollywood Police Department would bring in certain child stars and ask them, once they were older, whether or not he carried on inappropriate behavior with them. And one particular person is a gentleman named Corey Feldman. Corey Feldman was questioned several times by the Hollywood Police Department and asked several times about Michael Jackson. He was asked whether or not Michael did anything inappropriate with him or any of his other child star colleagues. And he always said no, he never did anything inappropriate, but he kept letting them know that there are some people who did some things, who violated them and abused them at young ages. And for instance, he named probably about two producers, two or three, that are well known to this day, who've worked without any accusations or getting picked up or ran off to jail. No trial has occurred with them. And the police told Corey, we know about this particular person, but we don't care about that. We want to know about Michael Jackson. Now think about how that would make these young men, these young boys at that time feel, or these young male stars. Some of his friends, when they were violated, these pedophiles were giving them drugs at the ages of 10 and 12 years old, okay, having house parties, and violated some of his friends and him. And some of his friends have died of overdoses, okay? They've had very rocky lives because of that abuse. So when we don't try to incorporate justice for all, it affects everyone negatively, okay? Now, you'll see, I gave an example here of a person called Liberace. Liberace is a pianist that is known to be he was flamboyant and very popular during like the 70s. And he was known in Hollywood openly for being a pedophile. And one particular person he called his son, they knew openly in Hollywood that he was also his son/boy toy. And they would say that. This gentleman name is Scott Thorson. And Scott Thorson finally began to come forth and speak all truth to power of what happened to him. He came from an abusive home. His father was abusive and his mother was mentally ill. And I guess he ran away from home. But Liberace took him into his household. He even gave him plastic surgery to try and look like Liberace. But at 16 years old, he began to violate this gentleman for 6 years. So this is something that was blatantly out there and Hollywood knew about, the police knew about, and nothing was done about that. Think about how these people, and he began to realize, I guess in the 90s, and as he grew older, that what he went through was abuse, sexual abuse. That wasn't a relationship. So somebody should have called that out. If Liberace or Michael Jackson had switched position, Michael would have been under a jail. I'll put it that way. Okay? So I'm just pointing out the fact that when we strive for equal justice, that it also, when there are white victims, that this helps them out. You are destroying that population when you don't carry out equal justice. And people are watching this at the forefront. You go on and you look at people like Bill Cosby. He went off and got away with what he was doing for some decades, okay? But when all of the stuff came crumbling down, come to find out there were about maybe over 45, nearly 50 victims who came forth and said that he would drug their drinks, invite them over, act as if he's going to give them a role in a movie or something like that, and ask them to come for a reading, and then would drug them and rape them. Okay? And, after all this numerous people came out, they got him to admit to something on a technicality. He incriminated himself and went to jail for about maybe a year or so, but got off because of I think what happened was the statute of limitation was gone, but the way in which they got him to so-called incriminate himself went against whatever laws that they had in place. And so he was able to get out of jail. Now, if he had not gone to jail, then there were a lot of black people who were starting to say, yeah, he did wrong. You have even in his comedy routine in the 70s where he talks about placing stuff in people's drink, right? And who you think he got it from? He got it from a society during the 70s that was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And they would openly talk about things like that, violating women in this manner. But when he went to jail and people were calling him out, fortunately they started the Me Too movement and they began to call out Harvey Weinstein. I was very shocked that he finally went to prison, but he was known for decades to blatantly rape women and abuse them with the threat of destroying their career. All this type of mannerism from people like this, you got to understand. We cover in UBP Lesson 15. We have 4 parts to that lesson. But these are old principalities rearing its ugly head to destroy, especially black and brown descendants of Israel, but also to try and engulf all aspects of every population and every ethnic group. Okay? This sexual immorality, and gaining wealth and gaining money from it. So finally he went to prison and see how that helped the victims. And he probably had hundreds of victims over 30 years or more. Okay? You look at R. Kelly. He was accused of and convicted of dating girls at the age of 16, 17, 18. Some of them he had living in his mansion all the way until they were grown, but they stayed within his mansion and his household. But he was convicted of having sex with minors, at the age that they first were involved with him. They were like 16 years old. But I want you to look at Hugh Hefner here. Hugh Hefner used to go, and these pretty girls that were like 18, 19 years old, he would go to the families of these young girls, beautiful girls, and offer the family money, promise to take care of these young girls if they could come stay at his Playboy mansion. He was the creator of Playboy magazine. And he would ask their families to do that. And everybody's like, but he took care of those girls. But this is no different than sex trafficking. You have an accuser of Bill Cosby who said that she engaged in activity with Bill Cosby at the Playboy Mansion, and she said she was 15 years old. Okay? So there are a multitude of men who engage in activities at the Playboy Mansion. What Hugh Hefner did before the whole world was carried out basically what should be considered sex trafficking and prostitution. But nothing happened to him that was glorified. A body of Messiah, I'm not giving a pass to nobody, anybody. If you're wrong, you're wrong. But there should be an equal standard of justice. Okay? Because there are victims no matter what race. They are harmed and they're hurt. And the way to make amends is to make sure you abide by the equal standard of justice. God calls for that to happen. Okay? You'll find people getting emboldened. I have here at the very end the difference between black militias and white militias. Okay, you'll see here where, for instance, there's a group called the NFAC, a black militia. You'll see where when they go into a town and they march, they get permits. They get permissions from the police department. They get permits from that local government to be allowed to march peacefully and protest. Okay? You'll see where they have pulled up charges after one protest, probably like 2 months or 3 months after a protest, where they claimed that the leader of this group pointed a rifle, which he's legally allowed to have, in the direction of a federal officer. Not that he pointed it at him as if he was going to shoot him. He had a flashlight on the end, but pointed it in the direction to see who the person was. He was probably pointing it down, as I believe he said, towards his feet or whatever. But it was a flashlight on the end to see who was over there in that direction encroaching on them. Okay? So they pulled up these charges, and let's see how his trial goes as opposed to some of the white militia that went into the Capitol. Okay? Because they're getting slaps on the wrist. Think about Rittenhouse. I'm not even sitting here trying to argue whether or not it was self-defense. What I'm saying to you is there is state and federal laws that you cannot cross state lines with a weapon. And you have a 17-year-old who did just that, and the judge totally removed that particular potential of that charge being considered off the books. And people will go, well, that's the judge's fault. I say to you, still, the federal government has every right to enforce this law, and watch how it won't do that. Because the beast system is creating a firestorm here. Okay? So Rittenhouse got away with killing 2 people and almost killing another and got a slap on the wrist. There are people who have gotten traffic tickets, who have gotten more time than he would ever get. Okay? I think about the fact that he's 17. And I look at particular things that have happened to our Hebrew brothers like Khalif Browder. He was simply accused of stealing a backpack, never had a trial, and they sent him to one of the hardest prisons on the planet at 16 years old, okay, called Rikers Island. Everybody is looking at this, and the dynamic is, okay, this justice system is not just. You'll see where America want to flaunt its authority and try and help to make other nations democratic. But you have even today where America is trying to delve into and incorporate what people are seeing worldwide as America trying to butt its nose in another nation to influence regime change. They use that terminology a lot, other nations, but America is doing that. And they're trying to do it to Ethiopia. But God is changing the tides because now Africa have begun to be awakened and unite more. And they see what the Western countries are trying to do to them. And they're like, stay out of our business. But they're trying to affect Ethiopia negatively. And these other countries like Ethiopia are saying, you observe what's going on in your country and leave us alone and stay out of our business. And rightly so. Now, when I look at this situation, I want to say one thing, Body of Messiah. There's a movie called Black Panther, and I know worldwide it was a big hit, and many people probably have seen it. And I'm going to try to illustrate to you. I know my mind works a little different and quirky, but there is a pivotal scene in there where there's a lady, a museum personnel who is following around this character played by Michael B. Jordan called Killmonger. And as she's following him around, keeping her eye on him and the security is, he makes a statement to her. And I picture America like this woman. And he said, this whole time you've been observing me, watching me, and keeping your eye on me. But you're not paying attention to what you're putting on the inside of you. Now, I'm going to try and use this to give y'all a little brief peek into how my mind functions, because I think about a lot of time biblical scriptures and prophetic things. But I observe this from the perspective of Black and brown Hebrews because I've been awakened. And so I want to share to you what goes through my mind when I think of that scene. I picture America like this woman. So as you can see here, we have these Black and brown descendants of Israel who have been attacked, killed, and harmed by systematic oppression. Okay? And you see how America is continuously having their eye on this group of people here. Okay? Injustice, because of injustice, we've killed a Daniel once, killed another Daniel. We've killed an Elijah. We almost killed a Jacob. We've killed a Moses. We took the lives of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. And now we're sending to court this NFAC leader trying to imprison him. So we're spending our time, America is, and keeping their eyes on this group of people. But she's not paying attention of what's brewing on the inside of her. Okay? There are groups of people who are unapologetically and will refuse to make amends for anything, any wrongdoing. There are people who have literally gotten away with murder. Okay? And it's not paying attention of what's building up on the inside of it. There's a firestorm brewing. And we have to war against these principalities of Baal that are attached to white supremacy. And we have to do our best to do this. Not more so just to stroke someone's ego, but to honor the Most High God. He expects us to have an equal standard of justice. And Body of Messiah, as these things are going on, we have to make sure we keep our belief system strong and grounded in God's Torah and His standards above man. Well, Body of Messiah, this is the end of Lesson 17, Part 1. I hope you're able to join me for Part 2, where we cover Revelation chapter 17, verse 16 through 17, where these nations are making her desolate. And like I always say to you, Body of Messiah, may Adonai Elohim cover and surround you and your family, shield and protect you all, and envelop you all in His shalom peace. Goodbye.